Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have one of the leading voices within not only the strength and conditioning world, but also the physical therapy world. He is one of the co-founders of the FMS, the FCS, as well as the SFMA. It is the legend himself, Mr. Gray Cook. Very lucky to have Gray on with us. He is absolutely a leading voice, like we mentioned, in so many areas when it comes to strength conditioning, leading the charge with the FMS around assessing people properly around where their limitations are for longevity. How do we get people to move better with quality so that they can be doing things for the rest of their lives? He works a lot with professional sports teams and athletes at a very high level, but these techniques and this methodology is something that even the everyday user can use effectively. The FMS is very, very elegant. It's one of those things that I was fortunate enough to learn through with Gray at one of his courses back a few years ago, and I found it to be incredibly helpful. Love speaking with Gray. He's a wealth of knowledge, and hope you guys enjoy this episode as well. Well, Gray, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
No, this is going to be fun. I've enjoyed your podcast. I've listened to a few people that I know and respect on your podcast, and I thought you did a great job of bringing the best part of their information right up front. And I do appreciate that because I know you're using it. So.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you hearing that coming from someone like yourself. And I just want to go into something really right off the bat that, first off, I think that the way that we teach at Power Monkey and the way that you've been teaching for decades now align really well. This idea of moving with quality, moving with purpose, and the systems that you put in place align really well with the way that we try to teach our specific modalities, whether that be gymnastics or weightlifting, whatever other specialty that we have within our Power Monkey team. And you know, the world that we work in is very closely tied to CrossFit, and we kind of, both Chad and I and the rest of our team, found a love for CrossFit as a training method, but also as a place to be able to help people essentially say, hey, can we be doing this better? Is there a way for us to be able to help these people learning gymnastics and weightlifting movements and put a little bit of technique into their training so that they can do things with longevity in mind? My question is, I'm curious, one, what your perspective is around CrossFit, but on top of that, do you think that there are certain coaches and certain gyms around the country doing things well within CrossFit and teaching technique that you've come across well? And if so, who are those gyms and who are those people? And if you've come across them, I'd love to hear them.
You know, it's hard to tell who's in business now and who's not out of business. And I'm very bad with names, but at one time when we looked at people who were working in a CrossFit box or actually owned it, the ones who were affiliated with a background, athletic training, chiropractic, and physical therapy, we looked and they had a lot of our education. Whether they had a movement screening station in their box or not isn't nearly as important to me as that if I just landed in an FMS helicopter and did an audit, I wouldn't like any of us to be surprised. So, you know, I have been a big fan of people who can post both better fitness measures and not flunk a functional screen. And so you guys know these names, Mark Verstegen and Mike Boyle. In the early days, the movement screen was about a 1997 invention for me with my background as a strength coach and a physical therapist. And I just threw it out there, and it was more for our own little petri dish to have a feedback loop on a subconscious movement pattern as opposed to a conscious, developed, honed skill. Because if you can't deep squat and you really try hard, you still can't deep squat. And if you have really poor balance on your left leg and you focus and try really hard, it doesn't get better. Therefore, let's not consciously change the things that are already subconsciously broken. Bad feedback loop. When I went into Mark Verstegen and Mike Boyle's place without them having done movement screens and we did samples, they were coming in 3 and 4 points higher than some of the other places I was invited. So basically, I said more of the whole food message, the whole movement message is making it over to performance, which tells me your performance choices are transferable and don't have negative side effects that we often see if somebody has a myopic approach. I love kettlebells. But just because I meet you doesn't mean you see that tactic today. You fall in a system, and there will be a time when we add resistance, and there will be a time when we unburden you and have you become more self-aware and then reload you. And for the first time, it's a different thing. And so I think a lot of people in the early days of CrossFit heard me both loving badass ways of training and stop calling everything with a band function. An overhead deep squats function, a single leg deadlifts function, a med ball slam is function, if it's transferable and if it has a measurable positive response. So most people want to talk about adaptation. I'd rather talk about response. We can change grip strength, balance, and a movement pattern in a single session, not because we made it better. We reduced inhibition, we elevated timing awareness, we dumped inappropriate tone. So when I see positive responses really quick, that is an indication this is way more of a functional problem, because there was an unbelievably transparent plastic response. So even though your single leg stance may erode before tomorrow morning or before next Thursday, that next half hour that we got after I just did the 3-minute upgrade is going to be an optimized training session. You should read and write movement patterns better based on what your coach is asking you to do. And that's been the whole thing all along. So, some people don't want to modify the program, even though the population is fluctuating. And I go to the NFL and I see the head coaches in the world change the playbook every year. And then I see a strength coach that hadn't changed the playbook in 20 years. And I'm like, I think this is an upstream problem. So
for sure. And, I think, Jordan and I were talking a little bit about this off the air, and both of us were lucky enough to go through the FMS, myself a couple of years ago, where I was fortunate enough to have you as the instructor, which was an amazing experience. And Jordan did it over a decade ago. And both of us feel like it could be something that all CrossFit gyms would benefit from, right? To have it as part of the foundations course. And I'm curious if gyms have ever approached you, or if there's ever been any intention to try to loop that in and say, hey, if we're trying to get people to move better, let's use this as a tool for most people to just assess, to see where people's starting point is, so that we know how to deal with them post assessment. I'm curious if you've had any gyms approach you, or any interest from that world to be able to utilize it in a more effective way.
A long, long time ago, when the movement screen was in its infancy and I was under a Reebok contract, they had just invented a thing called the core board, and they wanted me to get behind it with my physical therapy and strength conditioning background. Greg Norman was with them, and so was Venus Williams at the time, and Andy Roddick. So I wound up working with them. But I said, the only way I'm going to do this is, to me, it's not about the core board, because I can do this with a grass hill or a wobble board. It's about, what are we going to ask that to do? And then what are we going to measure to say, this is a pretty good answer to that physical question? And I'm like, that's the only way I'm doing it. So they actually sponsored me to train a lot of the NFL teams with the core board, but it gave me a good chance to talk about balance, whole movement pattern, what do we do when we see inappropriate range of motion and stuff like that. Long story short, the Equinox chain, very high-end, major market, brought us in, and we taught a lot of their trainers how to do a movement screen. And they did it as a free service on the initial walkthrough. So there were two paths that could be taken by a trainer. One path is, let's show you how warm the towels are and how clean the showers are and how nice the equipment is and how polite and buff the trainers are. And so they give you a real estate of you. The other path was, you went through a movement screen, whether you're just trying to lose weight or you're trying to play better squash or racquetball. And all of a sudden it becomes about you. And then all this stuff is to help you transform. We already know it's going to be a transaction, but what we're going to pay for is a transformation. They had, I think, 70% better retention of a client that got screened than got a walk around the car lot. And so I think everybody's got a question. When in the early days, when I was down at Athletes Performance in Tempe, Arizona with Mark Verstegen, many of those pro athletes that went there to train in the off season, what people don't realize is Sue Falsone and Darcy Norman, two excellent physical therapists with great soft tissue skills, were there. Now, those athletes were down there for performance. but we know they're getting soft tissue. We know they're cleaning up their ankle mobility. We know that T-spine is stiff as it can be after a competitive season. So if you think the med ball slams and dumbbell snatches were all they were doing, that's far from it. There was a lot of prudent, proactive maintenance. There was a lot of mobility, body weight stuff, all that stuff behind the scenes. It never makes it to the show reel. So we've had great penetration in a high-end fitness situation. We've had great penetration in university, military, fire service, and pro athletics. And it's simply because of the financial commitments in these areas, they stick to the numbers and the standard operating procedure better. And sometimes it's really hard to tell a club that's struggling that I'm going to raise the bar on you and make you more effective before I make you more efficient. No hospital has ever wanted to hear that. No fitness club has ever wanted to hear that. But anybody can sell shit cheaper, right? So if you're not effective, then let's not talk about economy. Let's make sure that you're distinguishing yourself, raising the bar, and the market and the environment and the flow of patients in and out and the way you manage them will actually make you more efficient. But so many of us want to insert a movement screen or a balance station or a force plate or some other type of analysis and immediately profit from that. And the profit is downstream because nobody is ever going to say, go upstream and find my problem. But we do anyway, and I know you guys do too, because whether you screen exactly like me or different, you're getting what you got to get to make the next decision that you got to make. And I tell everybody, as long as we're on the weakest link, and as long as you've calibrated the minimum effective dose for response, adaptation is going to take care of itself. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an elegant solution, and I wish more people in our community would take advantage of it. That's why I'm kind of curious of its application specifically to the CrossFit setting. But one of the things that I've noticed
I'll be honest with you, Lee and I are sensitive to that, because what I think spun off of FMS, maybe unfortunately, is a lot of people who probably didn't feel comfortable with the intensity or level of exercise that you guys do. And therefore, when you were found to be dysfunctional, people get on this corrective conveyor belt and stay there for 15 years. You wouldn't know my name if that's what I did with a corrective case. We get you moving, we clean up the ankle, but we also make sure that the upstream reason that ankle keeps getting stiff is not a problem. And I know you guys are very familiar with this. We see people who are inherently stiff and inherently sloppy. That musculoskeletal sloppiness is hypermobility, and we're seeing a rise of it in the population. We're seeing more asthma, more autism, more hypermobility, and so you could blame the environment, but it's what we got. And the Bite and Brighten criteria in physical therapy is how we see a kid coming in who's hypermobile. If I have two female athletes, both have blown their ACL and they're coming in, and one's hypermobile and one's just generally stiff, those are two completely different humans to me, even though they carry the same rehabilitation code. And so I've never heard a patient come to me and say, hey, tighten me up. Everybody already feels stiff. If you're hypermobile, you're carrying inappropriate tone because sometimes your gyroscope gets off. And if you're inherently stiff because you've been banged on all your life or you're just sprung that way, here's what I usually see. You're a little bit dehydrated and you've got really sticky tissue. So one person is going to have this major improvement in a single session, and one person's going to have this incremental improvement in a single session. But that's the way you came to me. These people need better lubrication in their tissue before they can ever feel good movement. And these people have no idea that that's not good motor control. And my job with the movement signals I'm collecting is to push them back to the middle. And what I think we used to do is take a strength test and call it weakness. And I call it inhibition now. And I see a mobility test, and I don't assume it's fascial. I don't assume it's bad alignment. I don't assume it's a tight single muscle. You've been behaving within that window of movement for a while, and there are certain triggers we can do to make you let go of that. And the one we see most often coming out of a gym that doesn't have good technique is a thing called high threshold strategy. The obliques are actually bracing the body for the next insult, and the TA, the transverse abdominis, and the multifidus, your paraspinal muscles, they go a little sleepy. Well, that is your proprioceptive core right there. That's the canister. Your obliques are there to check torque and maintain posture, but your TA and multifidus are there in the background like a little sewing machine, just holding everything together. And what we see is when people are given a high skill move and then they overload it and they try to perform the move before they've practiced the move, we make these compensations. The way Pavel solved it when I went through my kettlebell thing is Pavel taught us a hard style strategy. So you can't go into a load sloppy. What I did on the front end is said, but if there's a reason you're always going to read it sloppy, let me take that off beforehand. So we've got ways to fix your motor control and your mobility, but you've got to read those signals. And when I always preach mobility first, I'm not telling people they got to stretch, mobilize, or do soft tissue first. I'm saying if you've got a bad mobility test and you're not changing it, don't think strength is going to fix that for you. Do something, even if it's just hydration and sleep well, to see if that changes your mobility, or sometimes a good stabilization work changes your mobility. So my whole point is you don't have more information to work with if I don't create normal mobility. So
Chad, I'm going to let you jump in a second, and Gray, you get me excited on a lot of these different topics, and I already know that we're going to have a part 2 because there's too many questions on my list here for us to be able to get through in an hour. But you mentioned something there about hypermobility, and I just want to get a little bit deeper there because it's a topic that we talk about quite a bit, and it's something that, in my household we have to deal with. My wife is a contortionist. She's a circus performer. We work a lot within the circus world as well. And I think there's a lot of assumptions around more mobility is better. And it's not always the case, right? Does that person who is hypermobile have the stability to be able to control those full ranges of motion? Most of the time, not. The question for you is something you mentioned that I think is kind of interesting. You said that rates of hypermobility are increasing because of environmental factors. Is this true? Like, why is that happening? Why are we seeing that kind of thing happen?
Well, I think that, infants in the womb get 3 doses of testosterone. Those doses get manipulated if the mother's under stress. And that could be partial diabetes. She could be in a very emotional lifestyle. There's a lot of things happening. It's not just, I think we could all say that I think most kids, and I did we could talk about this before the end. My wife and I did a 3-year journey as PE teachers. I just showed up and me and my wife just decided to be PE teachers every Thursday for 3 years.
Like recently? Was this a fairly recent thing?
Yeah, the only reason we quit was the pandemic. My youngest daughter, who's hypermobile and insanely strong. She walked on a Tuesday and my wife had her on the trampoline in the backyard on a Thursday. So that's what I'm dealing with. Anyway, her school was a great little private startup with absolutely no physical education whatsoever. It was recess. And all the teachers were very committed, and it was a great curriculum, but there was no physical expression. And so I called Chris Poirier up at Perform Better, and I said, listen, I'll apply the Gray Cook discount. Let me just give you $3 grand. Here's what I want to check off the list. And I got boxes, balance beams, small sandbags, but we put the water bladders in them. We got the miniature battling ropes. I had Buddy Lee. He owed me a favor, so he came in and did a jump rope exhibition for the kids. And you watch Buddy Lee and you got to go home and jump rope. There's no other thing you do there. But I just kept exposing these kids to a Thursday obstacle course. I did not have a lesson plan. I did not lead with Gray Cook correctives. I'm like, I think I'm far enough upstream where if they will read and write each other's patterns. And so my wife and I had this very nonverbal way of exposing kids to balance beams and stuff like that. They patterned each other. And to give you my most favorite example of plasticity and motor learning, from kindergarten through 7th grade, we had all the kids take off all their shoes, get on the first bleacher, jump off, stick your landing. What does that mean, Mr. Cook? That means whatever footprint you land in, you hold that footprint and land like you know what you're doing. You know how a cat lands when they jump off a table, do that. That was it. Well, they fall forward, they fall backwards, some land stiff-legged, and whining doesn't work here, try it again. Well, the funny thing is, we were only there 1 day a week, but the kids started practicing this stuff, right? So the next week we come around, half the group is sticking a landing. Now, 2/3 of these kids couldn't deep squat. They couldn't keep their heels flat and break parallel. And do I assume this kid needs fascial work, or do I assume this kid's neurological system doesn't want the load of double hip flexion and double shoulder flexion simultaneously, we don't have the core stability and respiration to handle that. So we wall off that pattern. We just don't know what to do here. Well, you can't stick that landing if you can't have a soft squat. So I wasn't doing mobility with the kids. Week 4, I walk in, every one of my kids, boom, sticking a landing, right? And I walk down, I act like I'm not impressed, and I start handing out bean bags. I'm like, now put that on your head and do that. Took them another 2 weeks. Now they're landing with a bean bag on their head. Balance beams, jumping off the box, flexed arm hang. That got better as an aggregate of restoring a signature pattern that I think both you guys wholeheartely respect. That overhead deep squat tells a good coach a lot about your state of readiness and your state of risk, you know, because it shouldn't be a bad pattern if you've developed holistically. And if you can't do it, it doesn't mean you need a major fix or orthopedic surgery, or we could go on a Scottish hip debate, but believe me, I've had a lot of people with Scottish hips that squatted pain-free in my presence, and it's because there's a structural component and a functional component, and most people with the appropriate foot position and core stability can find a way to squat healthily, even if it doesn't look like what the magazine says. So that's where I am on that. But watching those kids become plastic and not trying to correct something that simply wasn't growing well was a lesson that I had to live and breathe. I couldn't just get that from the research. So, and they couldn't fire me because I did it for free. So,
Chad, I'll let you jump in there. I got a ton more, but feel bad. So you can
Yeah,
jump in.
no, you shouldn't feel bad. I kind of want to let you keep going because I'm just enjoying listening to this. I mean, you know, as you guys know, and the listeners know, mobility is something I'm extremely passionate about. It's just kind of what I took to as a weightlifting coach. And I don't think enough weightlifting coaches are digging deeply enough into that and the basics and, you know, good technique. They're more focused on, you know, getting these athletes to lift as much as they can and trying to support them in competition, which is a part of it. But there's a lot of these basics missing. So as you guys know, I'm constantly studying mobility and writing about mobility, and have my own mobility app and system and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to pick up and take in whatever I can from this guy here. He's saying a lot of amazing things that's, you know, teaching me new stuff, but also reinforcing a lot of stuff that we do, as you mentioned, Dave, and everything else. But I think for me, and I don't want to take us too far off of the stuff that we're talking about, but I'm always very curious as to why someone is so passionate about what they're doing. So Gray, you know, again, for me, I said, for whatever reason, I took to mobility, and I could dig into the reasons why I think that is, like on a base level from, you know, who I am and what I've been through. But for you, Gray, why are you so passionate about it, about mobility and about, you know, FMS and what FMS basically is?
I think it's because I was an unbelievably average athlete. I was a discus thrower. I played football. I was just a big kid. I was the hypermobile kid, and I was actually born with a right inguinal hernia. So I've never not had pain in my right hip crease. Incidentally, I had multiple fractures on my right side. And because I was hypermobile and I didn't know what that meant, I had a lot of other sprains and strains that other people didn't have. Now, I had plenty of strength, but I had too many movement options and often made the wrong decision. On top of that, I was your ADHD kid before we knew what that was. So you just got slapped in the back of the head a lot. And I also had dyslexia. So I realize how someone feels who's lost their movement. And then somebody's trying to teach them movement the way the book says instead of the way you learned it the first time. And so when I got into PT school and I saw, oh my gosh, people actually run before they speak. They have reciprocal running before they have command of too many words. So if you watch in that developmental progression, rolling to planking, to kneeling, to crawling, all this, all the way squatting, stepping, standing, and you see this, then you realize, oh, that's the operating system for the human movement system, because everything from a backhand ground stroke, right, to rock climbing comes from that. That's the headwaters of movement. When is it okay to lose one of these positions? Kelly calls them shapes, right? We call them postures. And postures and patterns are what you assemble to get from point A to point B. And when I saw people taking physical therapy and strength conditioning to these papers on glute medius, I knew we were missing something, because it's never one muscle. It just never is. It's never one muscle until the diagnostic process says it is. And then if you do the right thing, you're not there long. You flip the trigger, you come back out the rabbit hole. But I got sick and tired of people saying my knee patient is better on the goniometer, but their single leg stance, their squat, their ambulation, and their toe touch hasn't seemed to change. And I'm like, well, then you didn't hit save on the document. You wrote a damn nice paper at the local level of the knee flexibility, but none of that mobility in isolation is being expressed in a full behavioral pattern that's supposed to be your initial operating system. Flip one step further. When you install an app that starts cannibalizing your operating system, do you get a new operating system, or you just trash the app? And a lot of people pick a sport or an activity or an endeavor, and their on-ramp maybe not be appropriate for their ability. So, Stanley McChrystal just wrote a book called Risk, and it boils down to two things. Every sport has inherent threats in it, and both gymnastics and weightlifting actually attract more hypermobile people than stiff people. But you happen to be hypermobile and strong. So if you get under good technique and good coaching, you don't need any stability work whatsoever. I think I heard you guys say that with Kelly, and I can't emphasize that enough. If you come to a skill and you have normal mobility, not excessive, you don't train for excessive mobility. Nature gives it to you or not. But you should be able to accomplish most things with normal range of motion. And if the sport requires a few more degrees, it'll give it to you slow. We get stronger as we go. But when you show up really sloppy, there's a good chance you're going to exploit your mobility, but you're going to have really poor alignment and very poor feedback. So when I look at both of these sports, one of the things I see is a lot of people only think they need the mobility for the sport they're doing. No, if your mobility I can't see it through your natural operating system, these shapes and patterns that look a lot like the movement screen. The only reason the movement screen looks like it does, and a lot of people don't understand that, we've had 8 years of people trying to do what the movement screen does with a camera system and dots. The reason it is the functional movement screen imposes a physical obstacle in your face. We make you lunge on a beam, not on a line, and not watching a laser or watching an avatar. We make you step over a hurdle that is your tibial height. We make you do an off-balance rotary stability, knowing it's an abnormal pattern, but if you don't have reflexive responses available to you in that situation, I think we can improve on that. So the two things we did, we had to have reliability. I want to know, not everybody has to be optimized. Our best athletes don't have perfect FMS scores. They don't. And most people try to read our thing from the top down. I don't. Just don't fail it. Don't fail it, and don't have viral asymmetries. A viral asymmetries mean you can do something on one side and not the other. That's going to unpack you. All our NFL quarterbacks are tighter on one shoulder than the other. But once one shoulder becomes abnormal, then we start seeing high fatigue, other pain, low back pain, things like that. So we know sport gives asymmetry and sport builds mobility, but you can't get all your mobility and then just drop it into the sport. You have to use it with integrity. And so one of my favorite lines that I try to keep reminding people of is, you give me an inch of length, I need to develop an ounce of strength. And if you try to get all your mobility and then teach all your technique, you're going to do it. So we just find those slots in a Turkish getup or in a deadlift or in a chop or lift with a narrow base or something that sort of gets you right up against that edge of ability in a sensory rich environment. We sync your breathing, and all of a sudden you pick up 5 degrees and you own that 5 degrees. It's not 5 degrees of soft tissue that you're going to go fiddle with and try to find that for a while. And that's on me. I didn't used to do that. I learned the hard way to do that. I was manual therapist. I'll get you 30 degrees of mobility, and then we'll backfill it with motor control. That is not a natural situation. So I'm passionate about mobility, but because it's a sensory bottleneck, not because I'm a biomechanist that likes putting dots on people. So anytime I'm standing on your garden hose of information, I should probably get off that garden hose before I give you new information. And that is the essence of mobility. Now, whether your fascia glides well, or whether your motor control responses, or whether you have a restriction, that's different. But it's really funny because one of the studies of people who can't touch their toes anymore came from cardiac patients who are having atherosclerosis. You ever think their hamstring tension might be protecting an artery that doesn't stretch anymore? So, mobility being restricted can either be a tone problem for a very important reason, like something going on in your body, or it can be inappropriate training. It can be inappropriate rest recovery, or it can be you're actually in more pain than you should be in doing this, and you're not talking to anybody, so they can't help you. So there's a lot of upstream things that cause poor mobility. One of our military studies came back. We had a bunch of soldiers sleep deprived and dehydrated, 3 points lower on the movement screen. Had I not known their history, I'm getting ready to give them a freaking corrective. They don't need a corrective. They need to hit a REM cycle, hit some deep sleep, rehydrate their tissue. Oh, there's movement. Now, from that homeostasis, I can start building what your next bottleneck is. But too many times we have upstream toxicity and we drop a movement corrective on it, and you'd have been better off with a sleep and hydration corrective. So.
Yeah, love it. Love it. I love this big point.
By the way, Chad, let me ask you this. Do we share a common friend? Do you know a guy named Mike Gattone?
Yes. I do the USA Weightlifting podcast as well, and we're having him on this tomorrow, actually. So yes.
Well, tell him Gray Cook said hi, because he was my instructor in 1991 when I got United States Weightlifting Federation club coach, and I had no intention of coaching, but I was going through a residency becoming an orthopedic specialist. And I said, these athletes hyperextend their back and hyperextend their elbow. If I can figure out how to fix their core, then I don't think a speed skater or an NFL quarterback or a mountain biker is going to throw me a curveball. So I literally went through that entire certification in the Peoria, Illinois YMCA, and broom handle, overhead deep squat. I mean, where do you think the movement screen came from? It was having my neurodevelopmental progression background, and then seeing, because I had no exposure to Olympic weightlifting growing up. I mean, we were flipping tractor tires because the tire needed to be over there, not because it was a fitness fad. But I didn't know anything about Olympic weightlifting other than watching the Olympics in the summer. So going through that, I put myself outside of my comfort zone and actually showed up at a few meets, met old school guys like Mark Henry and stuff like that. And I was just looking at these people on the fly saying, this is a whole different kind of human. And, move like a gymnast, strong as a football player. What kind of species is this? And I should be able to figure out how to have influence here too. A lot of spondylolisthesis in both gymnastics and weightlifting, and signature hypermobile people get here. Great coaches keep that from being a problem. Some coaches may just not recognize it,
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you said that, because I was curious as to where the overhead squat came from, and it's such a big part of your screen, as you mentioned, but especially because you mentioned that he led the course way back in 1991, and I get to hit him with that year. So I'll certainly do that tomorrow. But he's still doing the same stuff. I mean, he's the lead coach for all the international teams right now, and still doing those clinics as well. So.
We talked about an athlete about a year ago, but for the longest time, man, I'd be at the NFL Combine, we're doing our thing, and there's Mike Gattone. And I mean, you get a few guys like that in your back pocket, you don't need many more friends. He's just as good as they come, and he's one of the most approachable coaches I've ever met in my life. Really, he's a good guy.
Yep, absolutely. It's easy to see why he's as successful as he is. But yeah, Dave, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say that, me and you, Chad, always have this friendly battle going on between weightlifting and gymnastics, and which one is most effective and which one is most beneficial. And I just want to get your take on this, Gray, and correct me if I'm wrong in terms of progressions here. I like to think that being capable with your own body weight movements, resistance, simple movements, and being able to handle what your own body is capable of doing should be a fundamental first step prior to actually doing things with load, right? How would you align kind of a progression here? Would you say that bodyweight movements need to be maybe not perfected, but at least understood prior to being able to apply them with a barbell in hand. And one little additional note to that, I've heard you talk about in this progression that possibly something like carries should be an intermediate step before doing things like lifts. Would you say that that's kind of correct in terms of how you imagine progression?
Yeah, God bless you, brother. That hit me like a ton of bricks. And a few years ago, I developed a thing called the FCS, Fundamental Capacity Screen, saying I want a general purpose capacity gauge that does for me what the movement screen does, because sometimes I can show you downstream how this asymmetry is robbing your power. So I said, what do all babies do authentically before athletics, dance, and too much structured play gets on their life? And they run, jump, carry, and climb. You know, and if you look at humans, we're literally more dependent on our carries than our lifts because we carry things of value and we carry them distance. Our kids, our weapons, our tools, and our food we carry. And so I said, you know, if we go back to West Side Barbell, Dan John, some European training, the place where I think gymnastics can appreciate the additional load, and the place that I think sometimes weightlifting needs to go back to is I honestly think body weight competence movement may not handle load well. So it helps you get over that. And the first thing we see is we did a 75% body weight carry. So whatever you weigh, take 75% of that weight, divide it into both hands. We use kettlebells just because it's a natural suitcase carry, doesn't interfere with your walk. I think the length that we picked was about a 25-foot figure eight, 2 cones. So you're doing an inward turn and an outward turn. So you're going to smoke that inside leg a little bit. But what we found is if you can't carry more than 60 seconds, and if you have athletic ambition, you should be up near 90 seconds. There's an inherent strength problem that technique may or may not fix. So if you think your technique's going to fix it, don't teach carries. Just come back to the carry in 2 weeks and see if all the work you've been doing, single leg deadlifts or whatever, is recognizable. So one thing that I've always been passionate about is if we have a functional or a capacity test, practicing the test is not your medicine. That's just like a kid that goes and studies the SAT. It's a predictive tool for your first year in college. That's the end of that, right? So if you study to pass the test, it ceases to be the authentic signature. So I created this little movement capacity test that runs in the background of, say, what you guys would do, or what a SEAL team would do, or what a teenage soccer team would do, saying if your movement control, and I'm going to go back to Pavel and the Naked Warrior, right? A single arm push-up and a pistol. Let's start there. That's limb control. And we can easily get that signature to see if your limbs are asymmetrical or not. Well, we automatically assume we go to kettlebell culture. This is a pistol culture. Everything's going to be great. Well, what we see on a Y balance test, which is probably the gold standard for doing 3D balance right now without tech, is even the culture that can do pistols can do like 15 on one leg and 2 on the other. Well, asymmetry is just as much of a burden on the system at that level as the inability to do it. They're both recognizable as risk factors in the exact same environment. You're at greater risk with asymmetries that big, mobilities this big, or motor control problems this big. The next station is postural integrity under control, and that's where carry starts. So we do a heavy carry just to really compress your system and see, will you get a narrow base? Will you adjust your cadence? Will you adjust your breath? And will you let your skeleton carry the load with your stabilizers, not your traps and quads, right? Mm-hmm. If you pass the carry, we dissect your standing long jump, and we do it with a full body expression. We do it with your hands on your hips. And then we do it one leg landing on 2 and then the other leg landing on 2. We just dissected your power signature. And it's really neat because we find people that don't jump any better when we let them use their upper body, then we take it away. So we know that upper core contribution and that it's just not making it through there. So we do stuff like Indian clubs and kettlebell swings. There's stuff we do down. The very next station is impact control, where we look at a triple hop to see, are you just expressing the same jump 3 times, or are you picking up 10% because you know how to coil the spring and you know how to use your fascia, right? And so if we go into a bouncing move before we have a good power signature, if we go into a power move before we have a good postural integrity signature, and if we go into a posture move with a weak limb, you can see how you can perpetuate a mistake. So what I wanted to say is a movement screen is not a seal of approval on anything past body weight competence. And if you can get 2s across the board in a movement screen, not to the level you're going to need it, Dave, but I think this person isn't going to surprise you. They're appropriate for what you're getting ready to do, and you're not going to get any surprises. They may progress at a different rate than somebody else. It's when you see ones and major asymmetries or pain on the movement screen where I start saying, you know what, instead of modifying program, I just want to figure this out, right? Because I could modify your program for a month, or I could have this figured out in 3 days, pretty quick, just with the right tools. And all I do is say, listen, you either got a broken part, which we should be able to get on pretty quick, or something in your function is broke, and the road forks right there. You're on the wrong path, or you're on the right path going at the wrong pace. And we have the tools at our disposal now to recalibrate your path. We're going to focus on ankle mobility real hard for about a week, but it's not going to be stretching and foam rolling. It's going to be every pattern that likes more ankle mobility. I'm going to give you cool ways to do that. Slant boards will help temporarily, but it's not a permanent solution. It's something where I can incrementally let you take on more of your own responsibility. So I literally say, listen, if you got pain, I put the brakes on because I think we can turn that real quick and get to the heart of that. And then we find out, all right, when a Westerner wakes up with musculoskeletal pain, they ask one question: well, what's wrong with me? Right? You guys ever done that? I do it one morning a week. Sure. We never ask, what am I doing wrong? And when I started asking that question, I'm sleeping wrong, I'm eating wrong, I'm letting my hydration be cannibalized by how much coffee I like to consume. I'm making a fundamental error in that. And so when I'm really trying to talk word function to people, I'm like, you know, you should be doing things right, and they should be transferable to other things. That's the level of function. And so for the last 3 years, we've been reading risk factors. And believe it or not, we've got like 16 risk factors for musculoskeletal injury. And you guys are already going to know the first part of the list: high BMI, low grip strength, low cardiovascular fitness, previous history, which tells us we probably don't rehab ourselves completely, or maybe the system lets us go a little early without telling us we're still at risk. But the measures that got posted on that list, not through our research, but by the world itself, is a poor balance signature, a loss of a whole movement pattern, or a major asymmetry. We've never looked at movement as a behavior before. We always look at it through muscle group or biomechanics, but we've never said, yeah, I know everything's good, but you lost your deep squat. We just got to figure out why. And there's a lot of reasons why. You look at, we did a podcast a while back on how many times people have an abdominal surgery, but it's not considered orthopedic, right? Because it's a C-section, it's a hernia, it's an appendectomy, or it's something to do with a female's pelvic floor. That's a freaking orthopedic surgery. But general surgeons don't necessarily refer. And once we've cut through your core, you will figure out a way to compensate. But we see cardio go down, we see balance go down, we see a lot of stuff go down, and your core's not firing. And nobody's ever told that that's a big breakdown. And then the flip side of that is an athlete who's trained with an injury or inappropriate mobility develops this high threshold strategy, parking brakes in their abs. We think it's a T-spine mobility problem. It's not. They're actually carrying inappropriate and excessive abdominal tone into activities where we want that extra degree of dissociation or separation, and now we don't have it. But shit, they can plank for 3 minutes, you know? So it's reading the tea leaves a little bit quicker and not waiting for adaptation. I can see positive responses a lot quicker. And so when I got a bad movement screen, sometimes I'll go ahead and do the capacity test just to show somebody, I'm going to change your carry, but not by doing carries. I'm just going to get your balance better on your left leg, because that's an inappropriate burden on a carry when you're doing it. So
yeah, I remember just when I did the FCS, how eye-opening it was that I was so poor at a few particular areas. And as a gymnast, I consider myself to be fairly well-rounded, but My goodness, my single leg broad jump is just embarrassing. Just the kind of thing that nobody should ever see. So I think in terms of generating power, you definitely got me on that side, Chad.
Let me get you a quick corrective for that. Remember how we did that rope wave thing, that big tsunami wave?
Absolutely.
All right. Instead of doing a double leg stance, stagger your stance and get really narrow. And when that bad leg or the less impressive leg is behind you, you may have a different signature. So take a low skill power move and now change your stance to bias the weakness. Dude, your brain's going to take over on that. You're going to find out what is this bad timing thing. And if you repeat the test after appropriate recovery, or just do that for about 3 days and repeat the test, you're either going to get a real quick signature saying, oh, that was just a coordination stability problem. You have a favoritism to one leg, or incremental, this leg has been dead weight for a long time. So it's going to make either unbelievable progress really quick, which means you're probably hypermobile and it was giving you a motor control signature, or you've actually got some tightness maybe in that hip extension that just doesn't let you anterior posterior chain like you're supposed to. But the cool thing is it fixes both ways. And as long as you know, oh, this is going to go slow, it's just a sip from that cup twice a week and you'll be there. And so we could go look for something to fix. And if you had pain on that side, or a previous injury, I might put on my physical therapist hat first. Otherwise, I'd say, hey, throw me some good waves in a staggered stance. And if you can appreciate a difference in that quality or quantity of that wave, especially against a partner, don't stop this drill until you can appreciate that symmetry, and then go back to the retest.
Yeah, I got some ropes at home. I'll give it a try as soon as we get off of this. I want to create a little conversation between the two of you. I know that once we get to the point, Gray, we talked about the carries and then eventually getting to the lifts. Your take on the benefits between two fundamental lifts, the deadlift and the squat. And Chad is the master of squat, not just squatting, but squatting to full depth. And the importance of that, it's something he preaches endlessly at camp when we have our Power Monkey camp, and when he teaches his courses, and obviously with his mobility courses and things like that. But I'm curious between the two of you, and specifically with you, Gray, on where you stand on the benefits. If someone had to choose between spending time more on a squat or on a deadlift, where would you recommend them spending their time and why?
I have had a greater level of success simply getting my general public people doing some form of a hinge. There are lots of reasons that I might not go for a complete squat on somebody unless you're training with me or I'm coaching you. So I honestly think there's way more room for error and injury in squatting, even though it is an authentic expression of you got all your dominoes lined up. So let's say I have, let's be PT first. If I have a female athlete who's got a patellofemoral problem, you bend that knee even within a third of the squat, it's going to light them up. But if I truly have a vertical tibia, butt back, good, not a trap bar deadlift, which is sort of allowing you to squat your deadlift, but a real drag it up your shin bones deadlift, I don't care how far you go down. I remember working with very tall NFL quarterbacks, pulling them off of squatting because of what they do with their neck and what they're trying to do, and put them on a deadlift, and then better things happen for them. But I think an athlete lifting needs to own both patterns. But I have to pick the deadlift not because it's better, it's more primal. The hip hinge is the way we were designed to do it. A squat can both be a power maneuver, but it's also an elusive maneuver. We've got to get down in a squat to say, get under something or over something. So there's a lot more functional reasons to squat as a pattern than there is just a deadlift. But if you've got to lift something heavy and don't have the skill of strength about you, there's less moving parts in a deadlift, and it's a good starting place. So in rehab, when I know I got knee pain, I got a glute problem, not a quad problem, right? Poor patellar tracking is actually the patella stays in the same place and the femur rotates inappropriately because the glutes don't work. So I can do single leg deadlifts and pattern the deadlift. And I've fished a whole lot of pro athletes and very average people out of a hole just getting the hip hinge. Once I got the hip hinge, why wouldn't you go for the squat? Because the glutes just told you they're back on board. So if I've got to get you to squat better, I will always go through your deadlift to get there. If you already have a good deadlift signature, I'm either going to work on the lunge or the squat, whatever's more appropriate in your sport. And if I'm working for a field or court athlete, believe it or not, if I see symmetry in the lunge, the squat's good enough for the sport, but it may not be good enough for you guys. Whereas I honestly think they could pick up better foot, ankle, and glute control by going a little deeper. But it may not immediately be transferable back to a field or court sport. But as a sustainability, the clean deep squat is a great place to keep everybody. Sometimes it's just a year journey to get there. So I think the squat is way more better to own. But once you've lost it, going right for the squat, I got egg on my face because we realized a bad deep squat can be seen all the way through an entire movement screen. We used to try to fix the squat first, thinking if we could just manipulate you back into that perfect silhouette shape, all would be good. What we really learned is we got on this journey watching a baby learn to roll. So our leg raise is our most primal pattern. And if I can see your problem there, and I work on it, we're that much closer to a squat. If I see a problem in your shoulder mobility, that's going to affect your squat. If I see a problem in your rotary stability, push up, hurdle step, or lunge, these are all things I can clean up without putting your body under the compression and symmetry of that deep squat signature. And believe it or not, I can get most people deep squatting better following that path than I can by doing all the neat squat tricks that we do to get somebody a little bit deeper. They don't seem to hold because we didn't line up the dominoes for clean unilateral movement left and right all the way through the spine positions on the way up.
Chad, how do you feel about that as a progression for it?
It was amazing listening to that. I loved every bit of it, and I like what you're saying about if you're going to load someone up and to start trying to get some lower body work and really strength work for the whole body, and they can't squat well, then put weight on the bar with the deadlift. And I completely get what you're saying. And I think, you know, for me, I am extremely passionate about the squat and mobility. It's what I do every day. Without being as passionate about the squat as I am, my career would be different. It basically is the base of what I do on a daily basis. But, you know, when people say I'm passionate about the squat or I'm the squat guy or something like that, I think what I want to make sure is not being misunderstood is that I'm not a strong squatter. So it's not about I'm the squat guy to make your squat stronger necessarily. I'm about, you know, getting you, using Kelly's terms, I'm about getting you to be able to create the best shape that you can. So for me, it's literally about a barefoot body weight, full depth in range squat. If we can make that shape better, deeper, the best that it can possibly be, I believe that you're a better human. So if I can do whatever needs to be done to at least head in the direction of improving that, then everything else becomes better as a byproduct. So now we can start talking about doing front squats with weightlifting shoes on and cleans, you know, in a way that can help you reach your potential. So it's about that barefoot body weight squat, and whatever I can do, whatever I can learn, whatever tricks and tools I can use to help someone improve that. As you were saying, Gray, you can get someone in a deeper, better squat by doing this and that and these other things that aren't the squat. I'm all for that. If I can learn more tricks and tools that I can, you know, use in assessments and give protocols for that, that's what I want, because my passion is about, you know, maybe not ever completely fixing, but getting someone to inch towards a better barefoot, full depth air squat. And I know that for most athletes, you know, to speak in terms of kind of what you were, I'm not going to fix their barefoot air squat by them doing many barefoot air squats at all. They're going to need a lot of other drills and assistant exercises to make that happen. They're going to need to elevate their heels, for example, or hold on to a kettlebell, or actually do front squats to help them create a better shape and to teach their body what that feels like and what that looks like. And then over time, through progressions and mobility drills or strengthening drills, whatever that needs to be, we're going to get them in that. We're going to try to, or we're going to see what their full depth barefoot air squat looks like again. And hopefully they've made some changes. And if they haven't, of course, make some adjustments here and there and everything else. But Gray, loved everything that you just said. And I'm looking forward to, hearing more about what you have to say. I'm sure we're about done with this recording. So like you said, Dave, we're going to have him on again, but looking into more of your guys' information. And again, for me, it's all about the squat and improving that position. So anything and everything I can do to help someone do that, that's what I want.
Well, we got to do a Zoom call one day because I got one thing I do with Indian clubs, and it's an ankle mobility station followed by almost a ballistic squat. Since I'm only using 2-pound Indian clubs at velocity, I use them as a counterbalance to get T-spine, ankle, and hip simultaneously, but I do it at speed. So it's a ballistic stretch. But to your point, you're not going to miss a stiff ankle, you're not going to miss a weak core, and you're not going to miss bad balance. So once you've got those dominoes lined up, the best way to hit save on the document isn't just to go heavy, right? And you can't go that deep in a kettlebell swing. I can go that deep with Indian clubs, and I actually bounce in and out of it like somebody who would use their squat more athletically or gymnastically than to move a load. So I think that what is an awesome thing about the two disciplines you bring together is they really do body weight competence into external load, goes through single limb competence, goes through a carry, and then starts getting more into a power expression. But if you really want to put glue on a movement pattern, bring it all the way to bounce. And I gave you guys my little PE teacher thing. And this is the way I talk to my kids from pre-K all the way up to 7th grade. I said, listen, breathe, bend, balance, and bounce. And if we're doing some kind of bouncing thing today, jumping or jump rope or something, and you're having difficulty, don't try to bounce better or harder. Just ask yourself, am I balanced today? And my balance is my deadlift. So whether I'm balancing my body weight or an external load, balance to me isn't just equilibrium, it's strength. I'm balancing my anterior posterior chain, my symmetrical motion, whatever. Below that is bending. There's your mobility signature. So if I'm having a hard time on the balance beam today, how's my mobility, right? And if your mobility's bad, how's your breathing? You're right. So I always got a kid get away from the module you're trying to fix and ask yourself about a fundamental. So we work it in reverse when a kid's frustrated, and before you know it, the kid who just fell off the balance beam cycles a few breaths, checks their deep squat, gets back up, and they finish, and we're not pouting that long. But it's the way I've had to coach athletes is you're trying a signature move. Now, once you've got everything lined up, a few bounces, stick that pattern for a few days. A few lifts, stick that pattern for a day. And a few stretches, stick that pattern for about a minute. So anytime I can get you ballistic, and I just found that working with Buddy Lee and jump rope, and then working with Dan Inosanto and Dr. Ed Thomas on the Indian clubs, they're as old as yoga and martial arts, and they were a big point of shoulder mobility at West Point. Right about the same time we could take photographs, like 300 guys facing the sunrise, no shoulder problems at West Point, so, but we started doing stepping moves, almost like martial moves for both lunging and squatting. And I'd love to get your feedback on that, because if you're trying to polish that squat and unburden the system with load, but burden it with speed, it's a whole different level of motor memory that's transferable.
I love it, Gray. And, I'm sure you guys can link up on that. I've tried that protocol a few times, and it's very, very beneficial for working on that movement pattern that we're talking about. But Gray, are you cool with a couple additional minutes? Because I got 1 or 2 more questions I wanted to ask.
Yep, I got a fishing trip, but it doesn't launch for about 2 hours. So
all right, I'll be fast. So the first one, I'll get you out on the boat as quickly as possible.
No, we're good. We're good. I got time.
Just because you just mentioned it, Indian clubs, and I have a little bit of it's close to my heart because Indian clubs was actually a men's gymnastics event in the Olympics back in 1932, and most people don't know that was one of the men's Olympic events. My coach in college would always have Indian clubs with him, and he was always doing a routine with Indian clubs, and he would always kind of like talk about how this was a part of men's gymnastics back in the day. And So I have a set in my house, like an old school antique set in my gym here that I'd like to play around with. I'm not really competent with them, but I just found them to be a fascinating tool. And you use them very regularly, not only with your assessments, but you have a course on Indian clubs. Why do you find them to be so helpful and so beneficial? And how do you best use them with clients?
Well, a lot of times when Brett and I first put the course together, Brett is a technical master. So he breaks down the circles. He gives you the classic Indian club. Now, I went Pulp Fiction with Indian clubs because I'm turning them into stepping, and there's a whole stepping, standing, squatting routine that goes with that. So we like you to do the classic circles, but I'm not going to make you stand here and learn a circle just so we can get your squat better. So what we do is a lot of just swinging back and forth, almost the pendulum. Mm-hmm. And now if I swing one behind and one in front, I'm actually, and not to steal anything from Wim Hof, but it's way better if we sync that breathe with a ballistic move. And what Kyle Kiesel and I have measured is when I'm trying to juice your core, I do the exact opposite of what a good weightlifting instructor would tell you to do. So if I'm getting kettlebell instruction from Pavel, I'm going to do a swing and I'm going to have a pursed lip exhale. I'm going to pressurize on the extension move of that kettlebell swing. Now, if I'm doing a big kettlebell and I'm trying not to hurt myself, that is the best way to train today. But if I'm actually trying to dump unnecessary tension and clean up my speed, I'll drop all the way down to a 16 or 20K kettlebell, and I will basically switch arms. But I will inhale on the up, and that inhale signature actually lines me up better than my motor memory does. So sniffing in tells me to tame the arc. I pull the kettlebell back, jam it down between my legs, and try to beat the kettlebell to my squat. So how many people smoke in a kettlebell set because of the unnecessary eccentrics on the way down? So I reversed the breathing signature, but we actually went into the biomechanics lab at Duke University with Dr. Rob Butler, who's now in pro baseball. And I said, I want to watch what somebody's feet do on a force plate when they just do a standing long jump. And Dave, that's how we got to the rope wave. The rope wave, even though it doesn't look anything like a jump, it draws the cheese coming up the same way, right? It's coming up through you, and you got that nice footprint signature. When we did a kettlebell swing, whether we did it sort of a high swing or more classic hard style, we didn't get as good jumping signature doing a kettlebell as we did from an Indian club. So going light at only 1 pound and then high velocity sort of bridges the gap between body weight and then again handling larger amounts of weight, because they're going to slow you down. So we know that motor learning transferred to sport only really works if we're at or near the speed of competition. So when I used to walk in the clinic and see somebody like with a tennis racket handle tied to a cable or a golf club handle tied to a cable or baseball, I'm like, it's not going to happen, because we move these implements so much faster. So if you're just trying to do chops and lifts, do them with the right equipment and get that 3D strength and balance, and then transfer that. But you don't put weights on the end of the whip teaching somebody how to crack a bullwhip. That's speed, posture, breath, everything. And clubs allow me to do for the upper body and posture what jump rope really does for the feet. And I honestly think when you see a Muhammad Ali and the guys of that era just smooth on the jump rope, that is a postural activity because they're maintaining spinal integrity. You can slouch when you jog, you can slouch when you run, but you cannot slouch and jump rope, and you cannot slouch and turn clubs. You just can't do it. So it's self-limiting. And even though, unless you're a martial artist, you know, it doesn't seem like anything will be transferable. It is a primal ballistic move, and that extra pound. Some people want to, well, I need a 15-pound club. It's not like that. You want the pound to increase the sensory experience. But when I finally had my breakthrough doing club turning, what I realized, if I looked at the circle I'm doing, the clock face, I'm only applying power in about 1/8 of the clock face. And then I'm dumping tension, breathing, taking a free, structurally sound ride, bouncing off my fascia and tooling that motor memory. And the same thing with rings. There is a tooling time with rings where I just want you to set these shapes long before we're going to really worry about your power. Same way with the clubs. It's a learning curve. And if you want to teach clubs to kids, get a Rubbermaid can, get the old black nylon clubs like we got, and turn their club turning into a club throwing. And they will become ambidextrous throwers, just like axe throwing or something like that. And that audible feedback, oh, they're begging for more. So kids will not sit here and turn clubs like us geeks will, right? But man, if after a turn I can throw this thing, yeah.
I love it.
So,
I'm gonna have to take the antiques off the shelf and actually start playing around with them a little bit more now. So you give me a reason to mess around with a new tool. I appreciate that, Gray.
Yeah, and if you run into a snag or you want to talk through some of it, I'd love to show it to you, because I wanted people to see you can start doing club moves right away that are athletic, or you can go into dip your toe in the classic clubs and get a lot of it. So there's two different ways to do it. Do the path that serves you, and then maybe turn the other one into a hobby. But next time you guys are on the East Coast, we'll go up to the lake, find a sand pit, and turn some clubs, man.
Done. Well, I know you got a fishing trip coming up, and we want to get you out of here, and we really, really appreciate the time, Gray. Before we get out of here, some quick questions, kind of like quick hitters, if you're up for 2 or 3 more kind of one-word answers here.
Absolutely.
First one, what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
I would have to say weightlifting, because I am not good at anything gymnastic. I've had so many orthopedic injuries that, but I will tell you this. I went through a MoveNat experience with Erwan LaCour, took my teenage daughters. We were caffeine free for a week in West Virginia, running around. And by the way, I would love to be a fly on the wall at some of the camps you guys do, because I think you can learn a semester's worth of movement in 1 week if you just focus and unplug. And we did that with Erwan. And just doing forward rolls. I've got a 2-level fusion in my neck, so I'm like Wolverine, at least right here. I've got some titanium. So but I still do like not a headstand, but a shoulder stand with an apparatus, and I'm still doing my forward rolls. So people think I'm doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff. So I literally try gymnastics, but I can actually do weight training. So
all right,
I guess I
was kind of closing his eyes there.
As bad.
I know. I'm incredibly thankful to hear that. And Dave, I got to say, I mean, you're beating me about 100 to 20, I think, in that question, something like that. And I feel like, if Gray Cook answers weightlifting, we got to give that meal like at least 100 votes. I mean, I think it's worth that. So maybe I just caught up with you.
Powerful vote for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, next question there, Gray. Any guests that you think would be great for us to interview? Anybody you come across lately? I know you have a really vast network of highly competent people. Anybody you think would be great for us to have on?
Well, I'm going to give you a guy that I'm probably going to end up reaching out to, and I don't even know if he's still doing interviews, but he's a chiropractor. His name's Phil Maffetone, and Phil distinguished himself all the way back in the 80s, realizing that most of us are setting an inappropriate cardiovascular pace. You guys are in a world of strength and skill, but that doesn't mean cardio doesn't apply. And I honestly think for those of us who are training our body to become more muscular and powerful, need that cardio as almost a brain dump, almost as an emotional tension dump. And so I often wonder, why am I so good on a bike or a paddleboard and I suck so bad at running? It's biomechanical. But what Phil Maffetone noticed is in that lower cardio range, you make less biomechanical mistakes. So he started putting people on that limit and said, hey, like if he's speaking to me, he's like, great, go for a jog and don't go over 135. Well, 3 minutes in, I got to walk. And then it goes down and I run. And what you realize is over the course of a month, you can produce a huge amount of accomplishment at the exact same pace that you used to have to start and stop. And I almost think that that's an exercise in breathing. So if you look at Wim Hof, he teaches you how to preload your breathing for an obstacle. What Phil Maffetone does is teaches you to come from the bottom and put the roof on that thing. But so much of our hormonal balance, and oxygenation of tissues, lubrication, hydration. It expresses itself almost in a healing fashion when we stay out of that interval mentality every now and then and just go for a cruise. And you got to have your heart rate in that lowest, say, polar slot. But I just think there's so much good medicine there that I give, kids that are myopic in a sport or an athlete that needs some downtime, I give them permission to cardio. And they start quoting all these articles about, well, I'm like, I didn't tell you to become a marathoner. You heard that, right? So I think that he gives us a way to use exercise to recalibrate and do a tension dump, and almost gives us permission to take it easy. And that's where a lot of the regen occurs. And we have to coach so much. When we do battling ropes, I coach the interval between the ropes because I know you just got your heart rate up to 190. All right, now let's have a sprint to see who can get back under 120 quick. And now all of a sudden I'm talking to the firefighters and the SEALs and the MMA fighters is, can you down regulate as quick as you just addressed the burden? Right. And we got a whole different level of coaching now because people are learning how that self-awareness and self-management.
All right.
That wasn't one word answer, right? I'm sorry.
Well, we got another one for the list. I know Jordan's taking notes here, so I would love to have him on. That sounds like a
Bill
fantastic
Maffetone. I want to have him on my podcast too, just because I think he was a voice crying in the wilderness. And now that we got better metrics, there's no reason not to listen to him. So.
So he was ahead of his time. And to kind of add to that, either on that topic or any other topic, any books that you would recommend to our listeners?
One that's affected me, and it really affected me early in my career, is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. A lot of people can tell you how to get mobility, stability, and what it's for, but going back to some of those authentic signatures, just starting with why. I mean, we had an MP3 player a year before Steve Jobs talked about an iPod, but he came out on stage and said 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then everybody got it, right? Prior to that, it was just a compression algorithm. Now, all of a sudden, it means something. And I think that I don't like people to hold the movement screen up as this golden calf or ideal, but there's no reason if you're training well or rehabbed well, you should flunk a movement screen. You know what I'm saying? So I really felt the burden of saying, listen, this is just another thin slice of movement to look at. When Rob Butler, the guy that did the Indian Club force plate study for us, he took movement screening kits to Rwanda. And all these kids that probably didn't have proper nutrition, no footwear, didn't even have a soccer ball in the village. It was just a piece of cloth stuffed with other pieces of cloth. Movement screen wasn't a problem. We got kids over here with gym memberships that can't touch their toes or deep squat. So my whole point is, this movement thing, whether you're fit or not, whether you exercise or not, don't lose that authentic signature of humanity. And that was my why statement. And I don't think that I felt that burden until I read Simon Sinek and did that. A newer book that came out is called Upstream, and it's by Dan Heath. And it really tells us, especially in healthcare, how many times we're standing here and we try to fix a problem. But I realized making the movement screen where we did is downstream of your health and upstream of your fitness or athletic prowess. So when we come in at the movement screen and you're throwing off these bad movement patterns, you either got upstream toxicity, your stress recovery cycle's broken, or you got a downstream insult and you're training wrong or you're overtraining. And so coming in right at that movement screen sometimes sent us to healthcare. And then people thought, oh, we're just trying to pad the bill at healthcare and capture everybody. That's how much it eroded when we live in an environment without a physical culture. And the reason I wanted to tell you I love CrossFit is because it assembled a culture of people who seem to support each other and communicate in positive ways. Where it goes wrong is when the number becomes more important than the quality of posting that number. That's all. And we see that in every culture, but I honestly think because the US hasn't had a unified physical culture like sometimes wartime creates for us, and thank God we're not in a war, we lose our physical culture. And so, it makes you, both my grandfathers in World War II, minimum pull-ups for a World War II recruit coming in when they're drafted is 6. You can be an Army Ranger with 5 now, and that's called Special Forces. So we lower the bar and think we're normal, but average ain't normal. Average is just average. And I think that having a culture that realizes that, Kelly said it best on our podcast, we set the bar low with the movement screen. We didn't set it high. Bruce Lee would look at that thing and say, I'm not teaching anybody that can't at least post average numbers on that. And he'd be right, Well, go work on, here's your homework, here's the skill. But I honestly think it gives me a reason to, tell a lot of people to do homework. And so Dan Heath helped me articulate that upstream influence that a lot of us, we try to fix movement, not realizing that it may have downstream stress or upstream stress. We can change movement, but it won't hold. It erodes.
Amazing, amazing, great. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure to get to know you and to hear all the things that you had to say. And I truly hope we can get you back on so we can dig into some more topics. But before you get out of here, do you have anything coming up you want folks to know about, or where can they keep up with you?
Well, when the pandemic hit, we started the Movement podcast, and we've really taken sort of just this general approach at movement. We don't try to specialize, but we're always talking to people who've taken just this concept of don't let movement erode on your watch to clinical and training environments. And we're probably on season 5 with that. And over the pandemic, I put my mind to a new book and said that so many people have become good at the tactics that have come out of the FMS camp, the Y balance test, the SFMA, our medical movement screen, the FMS, and then the FCS and our breathing screen, a lot of the other things. But it was very important to me that people use test and measures in a systematic way. So each one of us has a tactic we like. I like dry needling and cracking people's necks and backs sometimes. And when it comes to lifting, I like kettlebells, Indian clubs, and some of the old school stuff. But those are my tactics. The system says, where am I going to meet you and what are we going to try to budge today in you? And so I wrote a book called The Business of Movement, just saying that I think that healthcare has been too much of a silo. And I honestly think athletic development and fitness has been too much of a silo. There's a lot of people who are not completely rehabbed. Yeah, thank you, man. There's a lot of people who aren't completely rehabbed. And the 2 best places to check people trusting us right now are exiting my clinic and entering your gym. And let's not make any assumptions with that, because all it is an opportunity to find maybe a learning bottleneck, an adaptive or responsive bottleneck. That's really all it is. But I honestly think that, I think we've got a screening bridge right now, because while everybody else has been working on apps, we've been trying to put some surveys and movement screens together. And a survey is asking your brain a question about you, and a movement screen is asking a nonverbal question about you. And if you tell me you can squat and you can't, it's all good, but we just got to bring your confidence and reality back in alignment. And you'd be surprised, some of the people at greatest risk for injury aren't bad movement screens. I've seen a lot of pro athletes that are going to do fine with a bad movement screen, but they know what's bad and they know what to do about it to stay above the cut. And it's that lack of awareness that makes people look at YouTube and say, oh, I want to do that. That's going to yield this result. And that's where I think you guys, with the education and the onboarding that you do, no accidents are going to occur because the methodology is right there. But I do even check myself. I already know what the problem is, guys. I mean, I see it walk in the clinic. I already know what I'm going to do. But even myself, I go back and have one of my colleagues do a movement screen or SFMA, because the only way to protect yourself against confirmation bias is to be subordinate to a systematic approach that upholds the principles that you believe in. And if you disagree with your system one day, just realize that system was built on your principles. Maybe you're having a bad day, or maybe you're being inappropriately influenced by a situation. So, sticking to your guns means your creativity is on the back end of standard operating procedure, never in place of it.
Nice. Well, to our listeners, guys, there's so much good information here. Hopefully you'll go back and listen to that whole recording again and check out Gray and FMS and that information if you never have. Certainly a lot of stuff there that you can use to benefit you. And as always, we very much appreciate you guys listening in. Be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.